Hello everybody and welcome to today's BAInsights session. Today we're talking about business analysis, visualization. Really pleased to have two excellent guests talk to me about our very topic. I'm going to ask them both to introduce themselves. So over to you, gents.
I'll go first then. Yeah, that's fine. So my name's Grant Wright. I've been working in the field of business analysis and related disciplines for longer than I care to remember. Let's just say that a good 20 plus years. And at the moment, I run my own consultancy called Lucidify, where we focus on creating clarity through business analysis, service design, but also we look to use visuals to help with facilitation and communication as well. And I guess the overlap between myself and Paddy is that about 3 or 4 years ago, we decided to co-found the Visual Jam, which is a meetup community that we formed together.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. Paddy,
yeah, no, thank you. Pleasure to be here. I'm Paddy Dhanda, and my claim to fame is when I left high school, my high school was officially bottom of the league table. So I always tell people I went to the worst performing high school in the UK. And I wasn't very academic, but over the years, I've worked in tech and shared some of those experiences and got myself into the education side of tech. And so now I head up the Agile practice for a large technology training company. And I had the good fortune to also head up Agile learning for a global investment bank as well. So learning has become a real passion of mine. And now, as Grant mentioned, I focus a lot of my effort on visuals and the visual side of learning, as well as collaborating. And I also do a little bit of podcasting as well, like yourself, John.
And I'll take every opportunity to plug the podcast as well as anything else you do, gents, as well. And I'll put a link as well when I post this video. But yeah, let's do that. So I mean, it'd be good actually just to tell us first of all, just a little bit more if you can about Visual Jam and what it is that you do. And perhaps we'll start with you first, Grant. That's right.
Yeah, that's fine. So as I already mentioned, I think it was back in lockdown, August 2020. We first launched our Visual Jam community, but it started with the idea that Paddy and I just found that we were both interested in using visuals. I think I'd attended a BA community event, and Paddy was then doing an event at Birmingham Tech Week. He invited me along to have a look at what he was doing. And I noticed he had all these hand-drawn visuals in his slides. And I was experimenting with similar sorts of stuff. So I kind of had a chat with him, and I can't quite remember how that got to the point where we decided it'd be a good idea to form a community, a meetup group, to really for us to learn more about visual thinking ourselves. And we were going to do it. We were going to form a face-to-face meetup community in Birmingham, which is Paddy lives in Birmingham. I'm not too far away. And then, yeah, COVID hit and we couldn't get together. And so we kind of sat on the idea for a few months, and then we decided we were just going to do it anyway using the meetup platform virtually and Zoom. And so we launched in August 2020, and we were lucky enough to have Mike Rohde, who's the author of the Sketchnote Handbook, as our first guest. And that really helped us kind of get things off with a bang. And sort of fast forward a few years, and we've now got just shy of 3,000 members within the community, and we have people joining us from all over the globe. And so it's been really great to see the community kind of grow and prosper. And on the back of that, Paddy and I incorporated the Visual Jam, and we do sort of bits of training and consultancy all around that visual angle, and speaking at different events as well.
And the community you mentioned there, Grant, is that accessible through LinkedIn or through some other means? So, yeah.
Yes, so the community, it's pretty easiest to head to the visualjam.com to find out about us and the community. But from there, you can access the meetup platform where we post our regular events. So every month we run free virtual events, so you can access those. But we also have a community app where all of the previous recordings from the sessions we've had are available for free on that platform as well. And that's where we tend to kind of store our collateral longer term. And we have kind of a few more kind of videos and tips and tricks that we post on that community as well.
Brilliant. And I'll be sure to share that link as well, so that anyone watching this can have access to it. And I'll take a look myself, that's for sure. Paddy, is there anything that you might want to add to what Grant said?
Yeah, I was doing some stats on this just the other day, because I always tell people we've got about 2,000 minutes worth of video footage on that platform, but going by the latest stats, we've got over 4,000 minutes. So that's a huge amount. And we've done over 46 events as well in that period since 2020. So a lot of conversation, so much in terms of hints, tips, tricks. So if anyone is interested in continuing their journey beyond today and this session, then it's a gold mine, I think. And maybe just the other angle of that community is it's really, I think, given Grant and I a platform as well, because we do our day jobs and we're known for our BA work, agile work, training work. But I think if you ask most people on LinkedIn, what do they know us for? They'll say visual thinking, and it's almost been this accidental thing that we've stumbled into. And now we get some lovely invites for conferences. We get to present, we get to travel to lovely countries around the world, and we get to co-present together as well. And it's always nice when you're bouncing off someone else, when you're speaking at these conferences. Now, John, you was talking about when you've talked at the BA European conference, and co-presenting is something that you've done as well. So yeah, it's really elevated, I think, us in terms of our brand and sort of career as well.
Yeah, just to be clear, I mean, I'm gonna be speaking at this year's conference. I haven't spoken at previous ones, but I do recall. I mean, that's where I come across your excellent work, the pair of you. There's a couple of years back at the BA conference in 2022. Actually, so yeah, so that was the first time I'd come across your work. You might not remember, but you may. But he was effectively doing a series of drawings, I think, during breaks and the like at the time. So yeah, so I'd certainly used to that. I've probably got a leaflet somewhere that dates back from that time as well, but I won't wave it around. I guess moving on to maybe the next question. I mean, in terms of really, why is visualization so important? And I think I'll probably change that question slightly. So why is visualization or actual visual thinking so important? Perhaps in the context of generally all business analysis. And I wonder, Paddy, if I can ask you that question first.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you've got children, John, but I've got a couple who are reaching their sort of teenage years. And when I think about their attention spans, they've got the attention span of a fly at the moment. So this new generation, I feel, are really struggling with keeping engaged. And just to back that up with some of the research that we've sort of been conducting and looking at, there's a lady called Gloria Mark, and she is an expert on attention spans. She's been studying the topic for almost 20 odd years, and she did some really interesting research in 2012 where they took a sample of people and then were sort of measuring how long before somebody switches to a different screen on their computer. And what they found was the average amount of time people stay on one screen was about 75 seconds. Now, that was back in 2012. She repeated this experiment more recently in the last couple of years, and it's actually shrunk even further down to about 47 seconds. And no wonder the likes of TikTok and short form video is so popular at the moment. It feels like everybody is overwhelmed with information. We sometimes say we're living in an age of infobesity, where we're being flooded with data, information, and our brains just can't cope with all of that. And again, there's a whole bunch of science, and I'm sure Grant will probably talk about some of the stats around how effective visuals are, but we just take in visuals so much quicker, and the brain doesn't have to work as hard. It's something that is easily digestible for most of us. And so visuals are super, super useful in everything we do, not just, things like presentations, but meetings for BAs, any form of work where you're trying to articulate some kind of message. We can use visuals to really help supplement that sort of message as well. And worse still, when we are in that kind of focus state, then it takes, and if we get interrupted, our attention takes a long time to go back into that attention zone, where we're in the zone, as people say. It takes approximately 25 minutes for the brain to kind of get re-engaged. So as BAs, when we're talking to stakeholders, it's super important that we're able to really get people connected to the message, because as soon as they get distracted, we're going to lose them, and we need to keep them hooked somehow or other. So that's just a few ideas.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to all those points, Paddy, but I'll let Grant add any further points he has to that topic.
Yes. So whenever I get asked about why is visualization important or beneficial, I like to quote a good friend of ours and a former guest on the Visual Jam, a guy called Todd Churches. He wrote a book called Visual Leadership, and he summarizes the benefits of visualization using 3 words: attention, comprehension, and retention. So Paddy's talked a lot there about attention. You can use visuals to attract people's attention, and hand-drawn visuals in particular are really good at getting that connection, that human connection. There's something about them that draws people in. But the other angles, the comprehension angle, it's about the idea of using visuals to literally allow people to see what you're trying to say and to make sure they've understood you unambiguously. And the retention angle taps into the science around the fact that visuals have an imprint on our memory that means we can consume and recall that information far more effectively than if we just consume verbal information. There was a study done a few years ago, and I think the stats were something like when participants were presented with information in a verbal form, they could remember about 10% of it 72 hours later. But when you combined words with visuals, that jumped up to something like 65%. So a significant boost in your ability to learn and remember information. So yeah, I think there's lots of angles and benefits to visualization. And I think, as Paddy alluded to, it's kind of connected to the fact that as human beings, we're wired to take in visual information, right? We can't help but notice movement and pay attention to things, and it's a lot easier for us to consume as well. So I think when you have all the benefits that visualization can bring, I'm often surprised that how little BAs leverage visuals in their work, in my experience.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that, because I mean, we obviously convey a lot of information backwards and forwards as BAs between, as an example, business stakeholders, sponsors, technologists, and actually, I think in the past I've certainly seen BAs who seem to measure their, I guess, the value of their work by the number of their pages, really, which isn't particularly helpful if you're trying to consume the information where you want it short, sharp, and snappy. And you've probably got 20 other things to review at the same time. So, so the benefits of having something that's visually somebody you can interact with very quickly, you can get the information from it quickly, verify it is accurate quickly, is going to benefit BA as well as the stakeholders that you work with as well. And definitely, as we say, I mean, a picture paints 1,000, says 1,000 words, or whatever the term is, but words to that effect. And it's totally true, and I could present a large, page after page of text to an individual, and they'll switch off, they'll get bored. Whereas a visual makes things a little bit easier for them to comprehend the information, to want to digest it, or to make the effort to digest it. And then on top of that, if the more interesting we can make those visuals, then even more we improve the chance of the engagement. So certainly I would be pretty comfortable in this prediction that as people that are observing the output that you two put together in terms of being drawn, hand drawn, that's quite different in the main to what we're used to seeing, because we used to see sort of like diagrams pulled together in the likes of PowerPoint, Visio, etc. So just seeing something different naturally piques our interest and makes us want to look at it. And if we want to look at it, that's at the point where hopefully we're going to digest that information and want to interact with it, and hopefully give the BAs the feedback that they want. So really a topic of very interesting to me anyway, that's for sure.
Just what you said there, John, made me think about a recent experience I had when I was trying to assemble my Aldi special swimming pool, and I was trying to follow some instructions that were all words. And what a contrast that was, trying to find the appropriately labeled part and connect this part to that part, and with all weird names, I don't know what they are, compared to an IKEA set of instructions with no words on it. And yet somehow I managed to do those reasonably well most of the time. I think it hugely improves our understanding and takes away a lot of ambiguity. You know, words can be really ambiguous, and it's just reminded me, Paddy, the sign that you spotted in Dubai. Do you remember that one?
Oh yeah, I've got that somewhere. I was on holiday in Dubai, and I saw this sign, and it just instantly captured my attention because it could be misinterpreted. It was something like, "Toilet out of order, please use the floor below." So you could take that in a couple of different ways, and obviously, hopefully, we're all intelligent enough not to kind of take it to the extreme, but it just shows that words are ambiguous. I mean, we see this all the time when, as BAs, and I remember when I was sort of coming up the ranks as a BA, and everyone used to always be telling me, make sure your requirements are, unambiguous, make sure they're really clear. But no matter how hard we try with words, there's always ambiguity in some way or other. And I think that's really where visuals can help. I found another really interesting example the other day, actually, around this as well. There's a South African company called Clement Gold, and they do citrus farming. And they found that their sort of fruit pickers and seasonal workers were, they were generally not as literate as some of the other workers. And so they were trying to get their workers to understand the contract, the employment contract that they were providing them. And they really struggled with this because it was taking a long time for them to kind of go through all the words, all the complexity. And then they decided to hire a lawyer, and they created a comic contract. So this is a mainly visual contract. And this just sort of really helped, obviously, people that aren't as literate. And they found that the process took like literally less than an hour for people to really get a grasp of it. And it was way more accessible, and there were far fewer questions. So where time is money and you want people to quickly kind of understand something, visuals, again, are super useful for that. I know that's an extreme example, but because we just assume in the world that we live in, everybody can read and everybody can understand visuals. But imagine working in countries where your users, maybe some of your team, struggle with some of these things. Then how do you get through to them?
Sorry, Ron.
Sorry, John, I was just going to say, just what Paddy was just saying there made me think. I think on more than one occasion, I've had people come up to me or Paddy when we've spoken at conferences and we've shared our visual approach, and they're like, "Oh, I'm neurodivergent, and what you do really helps us consume information better." I am not going to pretend to be an expert on the hows and whys of that, but it's certainly another aspect to it that it lowers the barrier of entry for understanding. I guess that's the point you were making, right, Paddy?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And to that point as well. It made me think as well about storyboards that we sometimes put together as BAs. In that, it's easy to assume that all of our customers, our stakeholders, understand what a process flow looks like. Now in fairness, not every one of our stakeholders is lucky enough to get a process flow. Sometimes it's just a big list of words or procedures which makes it even harder to comprehend what the current state process is. But if you can translate that into a storyboard or even a comic strip, I know we've done something similar at Capco in that sense, and it is just a lot more engaging. People want to look at it, and if they want to look at something because they find it interesting or more stimulating or different, then they tend to focus in enough to be able to get from it what you need, i.e., to review it or to understand the information as well. And I think half the time, I think just having awareness that there's these different ways that we can convey information to our stakeholders is a good first step, you know. But and I wonder, I've been building on that. I mean, are there any other ways that you can think of, or any specific ways that that BAs can visualize information? I know, Paddy, I'll ask you that one, please.
Yeah, I mean, so maybe it's worth us just breaking down this term visual thinking a little bit, because, you know, when we talk about visual thinking, someone might be thinking, well, are we saying we just use visuals everywhere? Like everything we do is just now going to be now turned into a visual? Well, actually, no. What we really want to do is use visual thinking for different use cases, right? Hopefully BAs understand the concept of use cases. And visual thinking is this kind of umbrella term, and it's a bit like agile. You know, it has this broad meaning, but actually, if I, as a BA, really want to use visual thinking, let's look at the different scenarios that I might use it within. So there's a great white paper written by some great people called Bureau Brand, and they're good friends of ours, and they break it down into kind of 5 visual thinking types or scenarios where you might use visual thinking. The first one is visual co-creator. So that's where I, as a BA, want to facilitate a session, and I might have stakeholders, I might even have wider members of the team, and we want to sort of generate some ideas. And so we can use some kind of metaphor that we've drawn. So imagine a retrospective. We sometimes have the sailboat example that people use, and they use this metaphor to almost structure the conversation, but also spark some ideas. So visual co-creation, that can be a really great way to use visual thinking, but to spark that sort of collaboration. Then there's a visual reporter. Now, this is someone who, as a BA, I've attended a meeting, there's lots of information being thrown around, but I really want to be able to summarize that information in a visual format. And we might see this in the form of what we call sketch notes, where we have a lovely visual with some words, and there's lots of arrows pointing, etc., etc. So that could be another scenario. Then we have the visual storyteller, and Grant and I often use this stance when we're presenting. We will use visuals to supplement our message, but then we end up telling a story to spark emotion with the audience, so they really kind of feel like they're in that story together with us. And then we have the visual analyst, and that's probably more geared towards the traditional BA, where we're using some of these different diagrams. You mentioned process flows, but there could be, you know, data flows, etc., where we're taking complex information and we're joining the dots. We're trying to use the visual as a way of analyzing a situation. And then finally, the visual designer, and that's more of a graphic designer, probably less so for BAs, but it's certainly something that we sometimes have to do when we're creating our slides. I mean, Grant does some amazing digital sort of visuals that he's now been illustrating books and all sorts. So, you know, really taking that rough sketch and beautifying it in a digital format. So that's the visual designer.
And that, I mean, that seems to cover so many different reasons why we as BAs would want to visualize in the first place. And I'm certainly ticking a few of them off that I'm thinking about. I mean, like, for example, when you were talking about the reporter, that feels like, you know, somebody that might be putting together rich pictures or potentially infographics to a level anyway. I wonder, potentially that analyzer that you mentioned, maybe they might go to the level of dashboards as well that we might use. But it's important to think about all those different ways that we can visualize. So it's a really interesting point, I would say. And Grant, I wonder if you've got anything to add in terms of, reasons why BAs would want to visualize, or how BAs might visualize information?
Yeah, I mean, I think as well as kind of the general visual thinking types that Paddy talked about, if you think specifically about what a BA does and you follow the high level business analysis cycle, you've kind of got the front end of the process when you're in discovery mode. You're trying to make sense of the problem. You're trying to listen to stakeholders, discover information, and validate that you've heard it correctly. So visuals can obviously play a part in that, to almost for you to be able to say, did I understand you right? And show them the visual. And that's what I thought you said. And that changes the conversation, because somebody can look at that and say, well, that is right, but you're missing this. Or no, that arrow shouldn't go there. And again, that ambiguity we talked about with words, it's not quite the same when you have visuals. So definitely in that kind of upfront space, I think, as Paddy's already talked about, when you then need to engage more broadly with other stakeholders, maybe you're moving into solution mode and you want to facilitate those kind of discussions, then using visual templates, like Paddy talked about, the sailboat metaphor as a classic example. Those kind of techniques to be able to facilitate a conversation and use visuals to help act as scaffolding for the conversation and as anchors for our collective memory when we've discussed something. You know, how many times have you been in a meeting, John, where you've sat in a meeting room or in a virtual meeting room, you've all had a conversation about something, everybody's nodding along, saying they all agree, and then you come back a week later and everybody seems to have a different understanding of the problem? You know, the visual angle kind of removes some of that, or it exposes those assumptions and those different interpretations more quickly, because when somebody can see it, they're like, that's not what I meant. And I think if you follow that down to when you then need to present your requirements back, Paddy talked about the visual storyteller, that idea of how can we make our content that we produce as BAs more digestible? How can we get away from the 80-page document that you throw on somebody's desk to something that's succinct, that gets to the point, that engages them, particularly non-technical stakeholders? You know, that you might be okay with your abstract diagrams if you're working with technical architects and testers who are in that profession. But when you're dealing with business people, some of those BA artifacts that we traditionally produce can be a bit dry, I would argue. So what can we do to make them a bit easier to consume and yeah, a bit more accessible, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because quite often there's not just one layer of information that we've got to digest or present or share. There's quite often multiple different layers. I mean, and if I keep things relatively simple, you know, sometimes we're thinking about process and we're thinking about the systems used on the process, and then we're also thinking about the issues or the pain points relating to that process or those systems. So they're just in a simple example, you've got 3 different layers, and trying to bring those different elements together in any way other than visual way means it's actually quite complicated to try and reference what you're hearing, understand how these different pieces of information correlate to each other. Whereas on a visual, actually it's become so simple, you know, because you can see a process, you can see against a box, it has a system against it, you can see against a system and a process, it's got an issue against it. And therefore, you don't have to be an expert, as you say, on sort of different ways to draw process. You can just look at the information in front of you, which is a lot easier to understand. And I think to build on that as well, I mean, the storytelling is really important, because, you know, I guess and as a BA, every time you're presenting information, you're trying to tell a story to your consumers of that information. You're trying to get them to understand either what your other stakeholders need. You know, for example, if you're providing requirements, you're telling a story of what is needed, why it's needed, what isn't acceptable, what the boundaries of acceptability are. And the more information you're adding to that mix, the more complicated the message becomes. So if you can find a way of cutting through that complexity, then certainly find that using it is appropriate. And for me, visualization is a really good way of doing that. And I think the icing on the cake then is making it interesting and making it relevant to that particular individual. It just gives them all the more reason to want to look at it, want to engage, and And quite frankly, sometimes these things are wrong. Information we draw is wrong. If they're engaged with it, they can tell us early so we can go and correct it. And ultimately, we have to write stuff down and create requirements off the back of it. We can do so with a bit more confidence that we're all on the same page. So yeah, so really good that what I heard from you there in terms of the different layers of information and of the storytelling as well together. I wonder as well, but just a question that think about when we talk about visual thinking is really the how BAs might tend to work either with yourselves or with stakeholders in order to conduct, if that's the right term, visual thinking. I wonder, Grant, can I ask you that question, please?
Yeah, I mean, I quite regularly either am using my BA skills directly or working with others as part of a team. I think the biggest thing that I would say is when the main reason I use visual thinking in that context is, and forgive the pun, but it's to get people on the same page, right? It's for them to be able to see what I'm trying to say. The number of times that I flick on, I've got an overhead camera so I can just sketch and draw, and the number of times I just flick that camera on just to say, this is what I'm trying to tell you, but I can't get my words out. So I think there's a huge bit there of just improving that discussion side of things. I think it makes such a big difference if people can see what you're saying. And we talked about, the ambiguity of words, but what I've also found is I can have a conversation with somebody and I'm thinking, yeah, got that, understand that, it's all locked in. And then I go away and I quite often try and visualize what I've heard. And then I'm like, oh, what happens at this point though? We didn't talk about that. And so I see things that I missed. That I often say, if I can't draw my understanding, then I don't understand it, right? There's something missing. And so I think that's probably the main thing I would say. BAs can really use it to make sense of things. And then the good thing about that is you can kind of do that for your own benefit. But then what you can do is when you get a bit more confidence, you can sort of share that with somebody else and get their feedback, and kind of grows your confidence as well.
And I imagine to that point, Grant, as well, it says you're exploring these different ways of drawing. If you can do it live, then actually the people that you're working with get a chance to immediately give some feedback to say it's not quite what I meant, you might trigger something for the individual to recollect something else that they need, or other information that they hadn't told you initially, but just you putting something on the page that just sparked their creativity. And I wonder, Paddy, do you have anything further to add on that point?
Yeah, so I'll probably just build upon some of the storytelling elements, because the role that I do now, it's probably more of a almost product management role where I'm looking after a portfolio of training courses, and my stakeholders are salespeople. So often within the organization I work in, I have to get them excited about new products. I also have to articulate the rationale behind those products, like get them to buy into them. And as any BA will know, if you've ever worked with salespeople, no disrespect to salespeople, but they've got the attention span of a fly as well, right? Because they want to sell, they want to make their money, the commission, and to get their attention for any period of time is really difficult. And so what I tend to do is I'll think of the most ridiculous stories I can, completely unrelated to the thing that I'm talking about. And I'll give you an example. Last year, we in the Agile space launched a bunch of courses. One was around product management, another was around Kanban, and we had a couple of products around Lean Six Sigma, so the different types of belts. So I created this ridiculous story about Santa Claus, and Santa Claus was getting prepared for Christmas. And I think we were 70 days away from Christmas. So why on earth am I talking about Santa Claus so early on? Well, Santa needs to get ready for Christmas, but he was finding his product approach was needed improvement. So, oh, by the way, we've got this new course that's going to help Santa. It's a product management course. It's going to help him build better products. And by the way, he doesn't really know what his elves are up to because they're all working away and there's no transparency in the work that they're doing. We have this other course. It's about Kanban, and it's a great way of visualizing your work. And then finally, Santa's been working out. He's finding that none of his trousers fit him anymore. So he needs a few new belts. And oh, by the way, we've got this yellow belt and green belt, which are Lean Six Sigma courses. Now, just with that really ridiculous story, I asked a couple of our salespeople about 5 days later, I said, what do you remember from the session that I delivered, which was a half-an-hour session? And they literally regurgitate the story word for word, and it stuck. Now, I know if I'd gone in there with a bunch of bullet points, a bunch of slideware, it would never have landed in the same way. And because it was so ridiculous, the brain just somehow then says, oh, this is kind of crazy. I'm going to remember this. And it's a bit like when sometimes we're at the pub and someone says, oh, let me tell you this really ridiculous fact. I don't know how I know it, but I know it. And it's because someone's told them some extreme story about it. So I do think, as BAs, we can use some of these superpowers, but use them with caution, use them in the right way. I'm not suggesting, we turn up to a meeting and start talking about Santa Claus with all of our stakeholders. But there are times when we just need to get the message across, and we want to add a little bit of fun, and you can then kind of use some of these techniques in that way. So yeah, that's just my example recently, but I'm sure there's more sensible ways you can use it as well, which Grant Grant's good at those, but I'm a little bit crazy at times. So we have this kind of yin and yang kind of effect on each other. I think at times I'm often the crazy one. Grant's the one who grounds me, and so if you want sensible stuff, speak to Grant. If you don't want sensible, then speak to me. So, but I do think we're influencing each other a little bit as well. So we tend to kind of now sort of understand each other's perspective a bit better as well.
Yeah, I don't think it's possible to ground Paddy, to be fair.
I think that example as well, Paddy, I mean, it just shows that, we don't have to keep, what might be a dry topic. We don't have to keep it that dry. We can find a way to let everyone in the room be on an equal footing, and whether you celebrate Christmas or not, I doubt there's very few people in the room who wouldn't know the concept and wouldn't appreciate the main character, at least in this case, roughly what they're doing. So I think it's quite a neat way of getting everyone on the same page in terms of a correlated story and process, so that you can sort of tease out of it the same sort of issues that relate to the business scenario.
We could set a challenge, actually, John. So maybe 3 weeks after the podcast gets launched, we could put a question to say, can anyone regurgitate that story 3 weeks later? And let's see how many people will actually give us the literal meaning of it.
And I'll promise not to put any Santa images on the front screen to help them out. I wonder as well, I mean, it'd be good if we were able to, just to see an example of visualization, if I'm not putting Grant or yourself on the spot. One question that I also had, though, and I don't know if this is something we can visualize or think about, was really about like the creative mindset and really the importance of having that creative mindset in order to do some of these visualizations that we're referring to. So I guess, sorry to heap quite a difficult question on you, but does that work in terms of answering and drawing at the same time?
I was going to say, Grant, why don't you do your famous story on that, and you could visualize it at the same time? That might be quite interesting.
I've got my camera ready. What story are you referring to, Paddy?
The George Land one around creativity.
Oh, yeah. Okay. We can do that one. So I think the one that Paddy's referring to is there was a scientist back in the day, and he worked with NASA. I'm just trying my little spaceman here. My pen's running out, so I'm going to switch it. So this guy worked with the NASA engineers to establish a creativity test, to see how creative can our scientists be. So when we're talking about creativity, it's about their ability to think of new or original ideas. And so he ran this test for the NASA engineers, But the interesting part was what happened when he did that test on the public. He decided that he wanted to test school children and see how good they could come up with ideas. And these children were age 3 to 5. He ran the same test again when the children were a little bit older, and they were 10 years old. And then when they're a bit older still, and they're kind of my favorite age, the teenagers. And then finally, when we're adults. So we had these, I think it's 15 and then, yeah, adult. And Paddy, you're going to have to help me remember the numbers now, because I can't
I've got them, don't worry. They're cemented into my head.
And so he ran this experiment, and he tested a bunch of 3 to 5 year olds on the same test that he'd given to the NASA engineers. So John, you don't know the answer, I don't think. So
No,
what percentage of 3 to 5 year olds do you think scored at genius level in this test designed for NASA engineers and their ability to come up with new ideas?
I would say something interesting, about 40%, oddly enough.
40%.
Just on the basis of not being constrained by I guess all what's around them, sort of thinking as a child.
Yeah. Go on, Paddy. What was the answer?
Yeah, it was actually 98%, and that was 1,600 children in that sample,
Wow.
which
Yeah.
he then continued through to the age of 15. So it was the same sample that then continued this test.
Yeah. So you know, this isn't an IQ test, right? But it's about the ability to come up with new and original ideas. So he tested them again, like you said, the same control group, age 10. What do you think the percentage was at age 10, John? What do you think?
I would say a lot lower. Let's call it 70%. So there's a trajectory, but I suspect I'm probably going to be wildly out again.
Go on, Paddy.
30%, John. So
30%.
I'm only pleased I'm getting the trajectory's right. The numbers are completely wrong.
What about when they hit my my favorite age, 15?
I'd probably say 10.
Are they close?
Oh, super close. Super close. You're getting better. 12%.
12%.
Yeah.
And what about us adults, the non-NASA engineers?
I would say 5%, perhaps.
5%, Paddy?
Okay. Yeah, super close again. 2%.
2%. But yeah, a little depressing at the same time when you look at that, isn't it? But the point really is that when we're young, we're all super creative. So there's this perception that you're not a creative type. But the argument is, as we get older and we go through the education system, and certainly Sir Ken Robinson, who did that great TED talk, Why Do Schools Kill Creativity? He argues that it's exactly that, the school system that teaches how to get the right answer, not a good answer, if that makes sense, not a new or original answer. And so it kind of, unfortunately, our creativity kind of gets squeezed out of us. And I guess what we're trying to do is recognize that a lot of people, in terms of their creativity, feel like they're in this space. You know, what can we do to kind of boost their creativity and their creative confidence? But yeah, that's just a simple little example of how you can tell a story with, you know, rough stick figures, nothing special going on there. But yeah.
I mean, it's certainly clear that it's far more interesting to use pictures in that sense. It's also what was evident to me a couple of years back when I attended the BA conference and saw your work for the first time, that you know, drawings are you know, the visualizations are quite simple and easy to draw and easy to identify as well. So it shows that you know, people can visualize. They don't have to necessarily be an artist. They can, you know, they can do what they need to do with a few circles and spots. Sorry to take you know, to take the angle, but certainly I'm sure you do more in-depth drawings than that. But yeah, that's very evident. Is the simplicity of the visualizations as well. And in fact, as we said, that how clear it is once that visualization is on the page, because to turn that into a story would take a lot longer and actually it wouldn't hit the mark as well. And
But it's all about context, right? It's about how high fidelity do your drawings need to be. So I was telling a story there, but if I was kind of looking at a process and I was trying to explain how things work, and I wanted to talk about, oh, there's a team of people here and they're trying to get to a destination up here and achieve a goal, but might be a few twists along the way, and just really simple, rapid fire. It's rough sketching. That's fine if you're just trying to explore the rough idea. If you want to inspire in a presentation, then maybe you polish them a bit more, but that said, Paddy and I still keep our visuals and our slides quite simple. That they're still essentially stick figures and simple shapes stitched together. But it's because they look quite interesting and unique anyway when we do that. So it's a conscious thing not to overcomplicate the visuals.
I mean, I think that's a lesson that, irrespective of what you're drawing, is an important one, because I think what immediately occurs to me is those examples where we'll do wireframes of solutions, and often the most effective ones just have boxes and a few words on there to describe what elements are going to be on the page or on the screen. Now we could go over the top and start trying to draw an exact example using PowerPoint or a Delphi or some other modeling tool. But fundamentally, the same message is going to land, and actually doing the drawing with a few boxes and a few bits of text will probably take a lot quicker. So you're getting the same value for far less effort.
Well, there's an argument that because you're doing it in that kind of low fidelity, rough and ready format, that it actually improves collaboration. And the reason being, people don't perceive a sketch like that to be a finished article. So they're more likely to offer their opinion. If they look at something that's finished, certainly in UK culture, we don't like to criticize somebody's finished work, do we? But if it's clearly not finished, it's inviting comment and collaboration.
And there's a sort of a bit of an IKEA effect here. So there was some research done a while back where people were asked to estimate the price of certain goods, and they then got them to actually build the goods, just like in IKEA when we have to create things ourselves. And they valued those things a lot higher, even though the price was nowhere near that. And it's when you're involved, as you mentioned, you're invested into something. So if you have a visual that's half baked, just like Grant got there's probably lots of other things we can add to that. There could be some clouds and we go, oh, we need thunder because there's a problem here, or other things. And soon as we start to get people involved in that and go, well, what do you think happens next then? Do you think these people can get to the destination? Oh no, maybe that destination is completely wrong. Maybe they should have gone in a different direction altogether, right? And so we can start to then really explore, other aspects of the visual and like I say, keep it rough and ready and make it such that people can get involved in it. Whether they then pick up the pen and start drawing, or whether they're just telling you certain things, it's a nice tennis match where we're kind of vibing off each other. And we always talk about, I always talk about conversation. Like, to me, conversation is like innovation, right? Like, every time we speak, we're building upon one another's ideas off the conversation. Now, I'll say something, and John and Grant, you'll find some kind of connection with something that and you'll go, oh, that's reminding me of this other thing. And then we'll be building upon one another. And I think whatever tool allows us to do that effectively is what we're aiming for. So that's the most important thing, is the conversation.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think it's given them, hopefully in the last hour, it's given everyone a bit of a flavour of what visualization is. But through the drawing that Grant did a short while ago as well, maybe gives everyone a target to try and get back to that 98%, or at least chip away at the increase the 2% that we're probably in at the minute in terms of our creativity. So I think that maybe that's a good place to end. But I really appreciate the time, gents, and it's really interesting always for me to hear about visualization, how we can improve our analysis, how we can improve the way the message is understood, or even we get to the message and we collaborate as well. So many fine messages in terms of in the last hour. So much so I could probably subject you to another hour of the conversation, but you'll be pleased to know I won't. But yeah, I will end it there by saying thanks again. I'll be sure to share any links to some of the things we've shared, certainly to Visual Jam. I'll share that link as well. Really encourage everybody to go on, have a look at that, that old material that we've made available to the community, and presumably becoming part of the community as well would be something to recommend. So I'll certainly do that shortly. So yeah, so thanks again, gents. I look forward to speaking to you again in the future, hearing a lot more about visualization and the great work you both do.
Oh, thank you, John. Can we just do a last quick plug, because we're currently we've just launched a couple of workshops for people, and one of them is around visual thinking. So if anyone does want to take their doodling skills to the next level, then that's something that we've launched. But the other one is around PowerPoint. So if you're not into your doodling and you want to use visual thinking, we feel that PowerPoint gets a bad name, because often we see people saying death by PowerPoint, there's so many slides, etc. But what we've been doing is experimenting with some of the cooler features of PowerPoint, and people have always sort of asked us at conferences saying, well, how did you do your slides? And so we've created a mini workshop for that as well, and we'll share the links. Hopefully you can share those if anyone's interested in sort of really taking your PowerPoint skills to that next level. It's called PowerPoint Reloaded. So it's about level setting everybody in terms of really forgetting what we know about PowerPoint and learning some of the new stuff that's in there, because it's super powerful.
Yeah, well, very happy that you mentioned that last point, Paddy, and very happy to include a few plugs in that direction as well, because I'm sure me and anyone else watching this will find that useful and interesting. That's for sure. All right, brilliant. No, thank you again, gents. As I said, I look forward to speaking to you and hearing from you again soon.
So thanks, John.
Thank you.
Thank you.